Hello, everybody. Hope you had an awesome start to your week so far. Happy Thanksgiving belated to all the Americans. Hope you had a great weekend as well. By the way, say hello in the chat. We'd love to know who you are, who's listening, who's with us live, and where you're from, what country or what state or what city you're from, and what your name is. We'd love to hear that. Now, today we're going to talk about ear training, developing your ear, and specifically playing by ear. And I think as you're going to find out, playing by ear isn't exactly what most people think and say that it is. It's a little bit different. And the special guest that I have here today, that I'll bring on in a moment, will explain that to you and give you a lot of great insights about playing by ear in general. So, I have a special friend of mine, a guy I've known for a number of years now, an expert at training people to play by ear, among many other things, many other uh, areas of expertise that he has. And I'm talking about Dylan Andrews, who owns and operates and has founded his own music school as well. Dylan, glad to have you. Let's reverse positions here. All right. So, Dylan, first of all, let's see who's in the chat here. Let's see here. Ocala, Tampa Bay, Arkansas, India, Mexico, Orange County. I assume that's California. Colorado, India again, Hoffman Estates. That's not too far from where I'm sitting. In fact, I was driving through Hoffman Estates 2 nights ago. Poland and Illinois. All right. So, Dylan, thanks for hanging out here today.
Absolutely.
So when guitar players talk about or claim that they just play by ear, but when you really look at what they're actually doing, most really aren't playing by ear. They're doing other things like, their fingers are exploring via trial and error. So I wanted to ask you about that. Sort of what's kind of the difference between playing by ear and not playing by ear, and then how can people actually play by ear?
Yeah. When most people think they're playing by ear, the majority of guitar players aren't. They're playing, like you just said, Tom Hess, by trial and error. So you hear a chord or you hear a note, and then you pick up your guitar or your instrument and you fish around until you find that. Right. So that's not playing by ear. And I'm not knocking that skill. If you can pick up your guitar and quickly find what note or chord is being played, that's a valuable skill, especially in the beginning, but it's not actually playing by ear. It's just figuring out what you heard. Then playing by ear really breaks down into three different things. And the biggest one that most people know by it is playing by ear is knowing the notes, intervals, and chords that you are hearing without the aid of your guitar. So if you have to pick up your guitar to figure it out, then you're no longer playing by ear. But if you can just hear something and know exactly what is being played right away, instantly, and then be able to play off of that or be able to replicate that, then that is what really playing by ear is. But for me, that's only a third of actually what playing by ear goes into, because there's also knowing what notes are going to sound like before you play them. So if you want to play by ear, then you need to be confident in the intervals you're about to hit, knowing how they're going to sound before you do it. Because if you don't know what it's going to sound like before you hit it, then you're just a reactive guitar player. You may know the key, you may know that that note is within the key, but you're not sure how it's going to react when you hit it or how it's going to sound. Then you're not going to know how good it's going to be until after the fact. But really, master improvisers, you really want to know before the fact. And then another thing that goes beyond it, the third thing about playing by ear is also knowing the feelings and the emotions of what you're going to play. So if you're going to play a certain progression, or if you're going to play a certain melody or solo, that you know what it's going to sound like and feel like, and what emotions it's going to express before you play. Because when you pick up your guitar and you start playing, especially when you're being creative, you are going to be expressing something, whether or not you realize it. So it is very important that you know what you want to express beforehand and do it. And the only way to do that is to have a good ear. And the other side of that is what you're listening to, not to only be able to know what is being played, what chords or notes are being played, but to also know what the feeling and emotions you're hearing are. When you see master players or master musicians playing by ear, these are the three main things that are going on. Knowing what is being played without the aid of your guitar, knowing what notes are going to sound like before they play them, and know what is being expressed. Those are the three main points that I've come across that means playing by ear.
Do you want to go? Can you go a little before we expand to the next question I have? Can you go into a little bit more detail into at least one of those three things you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. So let's go into the emotions before you hear chords. So when you want to express something as you're playing, you want to first think of what you want to say and what you want to express. So maybe it's going to be intense, it's going to be maybe mysterious. You need to know beforehand what those chords are going to sound like before you start playing them. So, what emotions are going to be in those? Because, like I was saying, if you don't know what things are going to sound like before you play them, then you're just going to be a reactive player. So, for instance, let's say that you are playing a C chord and I'm going to hit the F note. Well, just as a general thing, I know that the F is the fourth interval. So I know that that is going to have a tense feeling and it's going to naturally want to hit to the third. So it's going to have a certain function and feeling. And I know that beforehand, before I play it, because I know what it sounds like in my head. I know what it's going to sound like before I play it. So that's a really, really important key to being able to play by ear. But is there anything else you want me to dig into, Tom Hess?
Well, that's a really cool start already. I'm actually glad that you chose the emotions and music thing. One comment that I just wanted to add, and then I'll let you continue in one of the other two or whatever, is that if we if we communicated verbally with just saying random words and phrases and sentences without knowing what was the desired effect that we're trying to have on whoever's listening, what is it that we're trying to get them to understand? If we talked without thinking about that outcome that we're hoping to get in terms of what getting them to understand what we're trying to say, we would be in trouble all the time, right? We would be saying things that offend people. And I don't mean like,
Yeah.
2022 offending people, everyone's offended. I don't mean this. I mean really genuinely offending people or confusing people. It would be a mess. Words would be a mess. Verbal communication would be a complete disaster. It would be a mess. So we don't do that when we talk. We put thought, at least a little bit, into what it is we're trying to communicate, and then we find the words, put them together, and then say the words. Guitar or any instrument, that's essentially what we're trying to recreate. We're thinking, what is the intention that I'm trying to say here, you know, mentally, emotionally, or whatever, for the listener to understand what's being said. And then what notes, chords, combinations of those things um, create that. What's the vocabulary? What's the sentence structure? What's the grammar? How does that stuff work to get across that feeling the first time, and not say, "Oh, now hold on a minute. Let me try that again." Oh no, let me try that again. The trial and error process. So that's a good analogy that might fit there. Did you want to
Yeah.
expand either on that or one of the other two things you mentioned on the list of three?
Yeah, well, just to go a little bit further into that is like you were saying with the speech, if you don't know what you're going to say before you say it, you have no confidence in the way you talk. And the same thing in your playing. If you don't know what things are going to sound like before you play, you're not going to have a ton of confidence in what you play. And if you lack that confidence, you're not going to be able to be the player that you want to be. Every note you hit, every lick, every chord, you want to be confident this is going to sound awesome. This is exactly what I want to do because this is going to express what I wanted to express. When most players pick up their guitar and they either start to improvise a solo or create, the first thing most people think of is what licks am I going to use, what scale I'm going to use. But the first thing we need to think of is what do we want to say? What do we want to express with what we're going to play? Then what intervals, what notes, how we hit them, where on the board we hit them, what scales we do is decided after the fact of what we have decided what we want to express. So that is a huge key to being a great player.
Totally agree. And that's a really strong point about confidence. You know, you teach a lot of students, I teach a lot of students, and one of the things that students in general lack that they really try to develop is that confidence. But when they think about confidence, they're thinking about their technique and, you know, making the chord clean and, you know, making the bend, the note, the strings that they bend in tune, or remembering their parts, not goofing up, not making mistakes, not forgetting. They think about confidence in that sense. How fast can I play? You know, how much stuff do I know? But it's kind of an afterthought. You know, how do I play confidently in terms of expressing, particularly when improvising or
Yeah,
whatever. And if you think that really should be kind of the starting point.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, you probably agree with this too, Thomas. The whole point of why we started playing, why we continue to play, is that it's really fun. And you can't have an amazing amount of fun when you're totally unconfident all the time when you're playing. But when you are extremely confident in every note you hit, everything you do, playing the guitar becomes fun on a completely different level. You have more options, you have more ideas, you don't get stuck and bored as easily. So yeah, it just guitar becomes way more fun. And I see a lot of players get stuck in this area and they don't realize that it's all linked to their ear. The reason that they're not confident, they can't play the way that they want to, is because they don't have a developed ear yet. And that's exactly the key that will give them what they want.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And, you know, during my, maybe you've experienced something like this too, but in my development as a player for, since I started playing guitar, there have been a few moments, a few specific things. And I remember exactly what they all are and where I was and when it happened. There's a few points of real deep breakthrough that I had as a player, um, that when they happened, everything, just doors just opened up that were totally
Yeah.
closed to me before. And the enjoyment and the fun that I was then able to have at a level that I never even thought possible before. When I started playing guitar, I couldn't play anything. I would just lay the guitar. It was like a black Strat copy. I would just lay it on my bed. I was a teenager, just polish it, dust it, and look at it and take a picture of it with an old Polaroid camera. And I just
Uh-huh.
thought it was so cool, but I couldn't have much fun with it except looking at it. I mean, that's, you know, the first like week or whatever. And then at various points, I remember when I learned what a power chord was. And then from
Yeah.
that, I learned how to play Iron Man, Black Sabbath Iron Man. Mind blown. Everything was awesome. And the fun just was off the charts for me at that time. And then when I learned my very first guitar solo, it was an old Judas Priest solo for the song Green Menalishi. I remember where I was. I was in my bedroom. I remember even which wall I was facing once I could play it. I just, it's totally simple, by the way, but it didn't matter at that time. Just everything got more fun. And then I
Yeah.
learned about vibrato. And I finally got my vibrato together, and getting that vibrato together again, just everything got more fun once my vibrato and the phrasing kind of started coming together. And then the next big epiphany for me was exactly what you're talking about, when I could take something I wanted to express, a thought, idea, emotion, and I started to learn, where is that on the guitar? So if I was writing a song or improvising, or even if just listening to a song by ear, and I'm hearing what I'm not hearing the notes as notes, I'm hearing them as emotions, and then being able to know, oh, that's this, and be able to find that without going to the guitar. I would go to the guitar later to confirm that that is in fact what I thought it was. And when I got it right, everything was more fun. I mean, just, and some of us, I know there's at least two people who are here with us live now because they introduced themselves in the chat. I know that they can do this at least to a certain, at least to a good enough extent where they can really express themselves. And I know that for them, playing guitar is an enjoyment that for those who are not yet at that point can't possibly imagine. So if you're not there yet and you think that playing guitar is cool now, wait until you get this skill and you'll never want to put the damn thing down. It's
Yeah.
just awesome.
It gets better and better and better. And you have fun through progress. Like you're saying, when you first started playing the guitar, playing Iron Maiden was incredible, blew your mind. But after a month, that's still the only thing you can do. And you keep playing it over and over, that gets stale and boring. And I see a lot of guys get stuck in their playing where they can take, even guys that can take pretty great solos, get stuck in their playing. It's because the progress has stopped. And the majority of the time, it comes down to their ear. And when you have that developed ear, exactly like you're saying, when you hear the emotions, when you hear something that you want to express and you do it just perfectly, that, oh my goodness, that it's incredible. It's hard to explain even if you haven't experienced it. It's just an amazing thing.
Totally. Totally. All right. So next question here I've got for you, Dylan. What should players, guitar players, what should players do differently, especially when improvising, in order to really play by ear? So what should they do differently than perhaps most are doing now?
So most are not even practicing ear training. So I would definitely start training your ear and practicing developing that. But really, what you should be doing is getting your ear to be ready for those real life situations when you improvise a solo. The most important skill you can have when improvising is to know immediately what notes are going to sound like before you play them. So when it comes to improvising, there's two main things you need to be really good at: knowing what notes are going to sound like before you play them, and being able to transfer what you hear in your head to the fretboard instantly. Because when you're in the middle of a solo, this happens to me all the time. I'll think of a great idea and then I can transfer that right away. And this is such a huge skill because we have no limitations when we're thinking of great ideas in our head. We don't have speed limitations. We don't have fretboard knowledge limitations. We can just think of a really cool idea and then we can throw it on there. So I would start practicing ear training for real situations. And a couple ways that you can do that, one, for being able to play what you hear in your head, is try to just, if it's new for you, try to hum a short melody, maybe a 3-note melody, and then try to be able to play that on the guitar and see how long it takes you to find it. And then do another 3-note melody, another 3-note melody. And then as you get better and better, do 4 notes, 5 notes, make the rhythm more complicated, maybe do some triplets followed by a 16th, right? But you can start thinking of things in your head and putting them on the guitar. Now, when you're doing this exercise, this is not about creating awesome solos or melodies yet. This is just about training your ability to take what you hear and throw it on the board. So if you think of a melody you don't like, it doesn't really matter. Just be able to find it quickly. Now, another way that you can train your ear for solos with being able to know what notes are going to sound like before you play them is what I call the hover technique. And all you do is you'll grab your guitar and you'll play a short melody. Like I'll be in the key of C, for example, and I'll just start riffing around. And then I'll hover over a note without playing it and see if I can sing that. So singing is the absolute best way that you can train your ear. If you don't have a good singing voice, don't worry, me neither. You just need to be able to sing pitches, that's all. Because when you think that you know what a note is going to sound like, the true test is if you can sing it. If you really feel like you know what a third sounds like, if you can accurately and confidently sing the third, then you really do know. So singing is the true test. So you can just pick up your guitar and start playing like you normally do. And then just hover over a note and then try to sing that. And then just do it again. Hover over that note and sing it. And it's very important that you sing the interval because that's what you're training your ear to hear. You don't want to train your ear to hear a D note, a G note, and so on. You want to train it to know that's the second interval, that's the flat third, that's the flat 5, and so on. So I would say being able to play what you hear in your head, just singing things in your head and applying them to the fretboard, and then using the hover technique to be able to just start training your ear to know what notes are going to sound like before you play them is a great way to just start training your ear to become a better improv player.
And just to clarify, I want to clarify a term to make sure that everyone
Yeah.
listening or watching understands. When you say sing the interval, sometimes the term interval is used to describe the distance between two different notes. But in the way that you're using the
Oh,
term
yeah.
interval, you mean the function of the note. So the third
Right. The scale degree. Right.
scale degree.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Exactly. The distance from the one, the root of the key. Right. So yeah,
Right.
exactly, exactly. So if I'm in the key of C and I'm singing a 2, that would be the D note, and so on. That's what you're really training your ear to hear. Because when you're soloing, you're using scales, using all that stuff. So you want to train your ear to hear it. And it's a lot easier too, because if you start trying to train your ear to hear notes like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you've got 12 of those. And then when you apply them to context, it's an insane amount of things. But when you're doing intervals in a key, you only have 7 of them. When you can really identify those quickly, that is all you really need.
Yeah, exactly. Also, before I get into the next question, I want to make sure everyone knows we will be taking questions live today. So if you have questions for Dylan or myself, just write them in the chat and we'll take as many questions as we have time for. So, Dylan, next question I have for you is, does playing by ear mean not knowing or not thinking about music theory, or not paying attention to what the chords are that are being played or how the notes are being played when you're improvising? So the reason I'm asking, of course, I know the answer and I know that you know the answer, but very often people have a misconception about what playing by ear means. When they say I play by ear, sometimes that's coded language for I don't know anything about music theory. I just play.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the question is, when people are truly playing by ear, are they not thinking about what the notes are, what the chords are, music theory, or what?
Yeah, that's a big misconception. Is a lot of the times I hear when people say they're just playing by ear, is a lot of the times it can be a lazy statement, like I'll just listen to it and figure it out, and that goes back to the trial and error method. But you can't play by ear unless you have at least a basic understanding of music theory. That ties into everything, because everything that I hear when I'm playing by ear, every single time I'm practicing ear training, it involves music theory. It's such a fundamental part of ear training, because if you let's go back to the emotion side of it. If I say, let's play a D minor chord, that means absolutely nothing when it comes to function and feeling and emotion. But if you tell me that it's the 2 chord of the key, then that is going to tell me way more. It's going to tell me exactly how it feels, exactly what tendencies it's going to have, the emotions, everything. And it goes the same with notes. So knowing your music theory is huge when it comes to that. And even just basic ear training exercises, you need to know a little bit of music theory to even be able to do them. And now you don't need to go to music school. You don't need to have a PhD or whatever in this stuff. You just have to have a little bit of fundamental knowledge about how scales work and how scale degrees work in intervals, and that's it. And you can train your ear. But when you're playing by ear, I'm 100% of the time using music theory.
Likewise, me too. It's difficult to separate the two.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, once you know about it, and if you don't know it, it makes it harder to train the ear because you don't have a good way to identify the thing which you're trying to identify. I mean, intellectually, you're lacking this. I mean, it can be done, but it's harder. It takes
Right.
longer and it's much more effort. So let's get to a couple of questions here, Dylan. The first one we'll get into: can someone with ringing ears develop a good ear for music? Um, I think that might be depends on how, how loud that ringing is.
How
So
bad it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
can
Uh,
you hear music? I guess is the first question. I assume you can. The ringing isn't so loud that you can't distinguish between different notes. So assuming that you can, I don't see any reason why the ringing in the ear would prevent you. I mean, Beethoven went deaf, but he was still able to write, hearing music in his head. So,
Yeah. 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 As long as you can hear music, you can hear what you're playing on the guitar, you can absolutely train your ear. You probably have an additional obstacle, but you can absolutely develop a highly trained ear as long as you can hear.
yeah, exactly. All right, here's another question here from Lee. What is the best way to learn or practice what different intervals sound like against different chords?
Yeah. So a great way to do this is let's say we're in the key of C. It doesn't matter what the key is, but you play the one chord. So I'll just use the key of C for an example. And then you play each interval and try to attach a very specific emotion or feeling with it. So when people do this, though, they find it very difficult, right? So when I play a C, and then let's say that I play the 4, for example. And then I ask you, well, what emotion is that? A lot of the times people will say, well, I have no idea. So a really helpful thing to do is to have a list of emotions that you're looking at to get you started. And then when you listen to, let's say that 4, that 1, you go through your list and you try to attach a feeling or emotion with that. And then you do that with the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and so on. You do it with a minor key. But this exercise isn't a one and done thing by any means. You have to do it often, and you need to try to find an emotion that is going to be very specific. So, for instance, let's say that you said the 6 interval is sad. Well, it's way too vague. You have to find something way more specific, because you could say the same thing about the 2 or the 3 and so on. So you want to try to find a specific example, but just go through each one of them and try to attach a feeling to each one of them, and just do that often. But if you want to dive more into that, Tom Hess, definitely.
Yeah, well, the thing you mentioned about creating a list of general emotions for the intervals, that is a good place to start.
Yeah.
But as the chords change, the feeling of the scale degrees are going to change as the chord changes, because the relationship between the notes of the scale and the chord that's being played, that change the chord, it changes the relationship, so the emotion changes. So that can be done, what you're suggesting. But if we're going to do that against each chord, you'd have to do that literally against each chord, and
Right.
and that gets you closer. But even then, there are still other aspects or other elements that will then change or modify or alter or color the emotions of those notes against the chords. But at least you have a starting point. So it's a good place to begin.
Right.
Let's take a question here by Oded. While often termed ear training, isn't it actually mind training or brain training? The ear is a tool that measures sounds and notes, not to memorize or analyze. Yeah, I guess this is it's just kind of semantics, but aural skills is the technical term for ear training. But ear training, aural skills, yeah, you're training your mind, of course, to process what it is that your ears are perceiving or helping to perceive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. I'm not sure at what point this question was asked. This might have referred to something specific that you were saying earlier, Dylan. It says, how about moving the note down a half step to full step? This is basic and simple yet effective, I think. So again, I didn't pay attention to when that question came in. It may have been referring to when you had your guitar in your hand, Dylan. I'm not sure how to answer it without that context.
Yeah. I'm not sure either. Exactly where that related.
Right. All right, Greg. Maybe Gregory can tell us in the chat. Oh, wait, hold on. Maybe he's got it says here, let's take Gregory's next question. Another way, moving up or down 1 fret, then 2 frets. Okay, that still doesn't help us yet. He's got another one. Here's an example from Greg. Full step from A. is G, then F, half step down from C is, I'm still not, sorry, Gregory, I'm still not following. Are you following this?
I mean, I may be off here, but maybe Greg is just talking about training your ear to hear half steps and whole steps and being able to correctly sing or identify those. And yeah, absolutely. Like, one great way to train your ability to hear half steps is to just sing the chromatic scale. Just go half step, half step, half step, ascending and descending. And then you can do the same thing with whole steps. You just keep going whole step, whole step, whole step, ascending and descending. And yeah, that's a great way to do it, because identifying half steps and whole steps is important to ear training. So if that's what you meant, Greg, then yes, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can use, as Dylan said, you could use the chromatic scale for half steps. You could use the whole tone scale. That's a 6-note scale for whole steps. You can also use one of two scales called octatonic scales. They are 8-note scales, and there are two of them. And the first one, in no particular order, is half step, whole step. Then that repeats forever until you get to the octave. Half whole, half whole, half whole, half whole. And the mode of that, or not the other version of that, is the opposite. Half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, until you get to, so it's alternating half step and whole step. It creates an 8-note scale. Those are called octatonic scales, kind of like pentatonic, but there's 8. So you can do that if you're looking for just non-tonal ways to train half steps and whole steps. Any of those ideas can be useful here. Let's see here. Let's take this question. Best way to improvise by ear over a rhythm with a lot of harmonic and rhythmic density. So for those of you who don't know what harmonic and rhythmic density is, let's talk about rhythmic density first. Rhythmic density means there's a lot of rhythmic events occurring in a short amount of time. So a whole note has very low rhythmic density, but 30-second notes have very thick rhythmic. There's a lot of events occurring within a measure, within a beat. So rhythmic density, it doesn't mean speed per se, because tempo is the speed of the beat, but how many events are occurring in between beats is essentially what density is. Harmonic density would mean the rate at which chords change, which is also called the harmonic rhythm, the rate at which, the speed at which chords change. So now that we've defined those terms, what is the best way to improvise by ear over a rhythm? I think it means like the rhythm part of the song, with a lot of fast chord changes and a lot of stuff going on. I'll take that one, Dylan.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm soloing over a piece like that is very dense, you have an opportunity to just milk out every note, because when I'll be soloing, I'll usually lengthen my notes. So what I don't want to do is, if everything is really fast and really busy, the last thing I want my solo to be like is fast and busy. So I'll be focusing on just hitting one note and just making that my phrasing as good as I possibly can. And now it depends on context here, but I'll also then, when I hit that note, I'll hear in my head the next note that I want to play. But in this situation, it's actually a bit easier, because if you're just hitting one note and letting it ring for a couple seconds, you have more time to think, as opposed to when it was the opposite. If everything isn't dense at all, it's very loose, then you usually need to be a little bit more thicker. So in this situation, I would have my notes ring out a lot longer, and I would use that time to try to play in my head what I want that next note to be, and then try to accurately hit it on the guitar.
All right, I'm going to take a crack at this question.
Yeah.
As well. So first of all, I love your answer, Dylan. That's a really good one. I have a second approach that you can take here, or that one can take. When you're playing over fast music where the chords are changing quickly and there's not a lot of time to adjust your mind, your thinking, your playing, to track all of those chords. Think about it like this. I'm going to draw you a picture. So we got 2 notes here. Okay. And the first note, this is where you're gonna start a phrase. You can play a lick, a phrase of some kind. So the first note is here, the last note of it's here. Okay. Now, in between these notes, you might play many other notes, 3, 4, 8, 12, whatever. Okay. So there's going to be other notes. So I'm just going to, with a line, represent sort of the pitch range as you're going to kind of going up and down or whatever. So you got a series. Sorry, the sun is reflecting off my whiteboard. So we don't have to always be thinking about what are all of the notes in this line in relation to the chords being played. You can, nothing wrong with that. But as everything gets faster, if you start shredding, it's very difficult to be thinking about all of those little details. And you really don't have to in many cases. Now, let's say that in this phrase, this lick, okay, this line represents time, okay, right here. And you've got the first chord happening here, then there's the next chord, then there's the next chord, then there's the next chord, and then this note appears on the fifth chord. Okay, these blocks represent chords, chord changes, okay? So if you've got all these different chords, and let's assume for the moment we're in the same key, we're not going far away outside the key, or at least not very far out of the key. You've got to plan, or you may plan this note, the first one, and the last note of the phrase. Okay. So now, because you're planning this one and this one, you're trying to match these two against the chords underneath. You don't have to go crazy with everything in between. If you're playing 16th notes and the notes are kind of going by quick, these notes are not as important. They're not nearly as important expressively than these two are. Why? Well, this note's important because it's the beginning. But this note, presumably, I'm assuming here, might be sustaining. You might bend this note or hold it out, do vibrato. The longer any note is, the more important it automatically becomes. You might want to write that down, people. The longer a note lasts, the more important it automatically is. So if these are all 16th notes, they're not that important relative to this one, and probably not as important to this one. So there are certain things that make some notes more important than others. Agogic stress. Agogic stress simply means notes being stressed because they're lasting longer is one of those things. There are others, but that's one of the things that gives a note a higher amount of importance within a phrase, okay? So my point is, in answering the question, that you think about this note against this chord, this note against this chord. You can rip through scales, arpeggio, sequences, licks, whatever, and you can still play well, have it sound good doing this instead of thinking about, well, I got to do that one against that one, that note against that one. This is a lot of work if the chords are only lasting, 3/4 of a second each before they're moved on. So you can make it easier for yourself doing this. And then as you get better at that, then you can start adding in other notes of importance. You can say, well, I'm going to focus on making this note right here really critical against this chord. And you start adding, as you can think faster, you start adding in more of your attention to those other notes. All right. Let's take another question here. How about this one? When you hear a song, does your mind think of scale degrees or intervals? Well, first, we'll have to define what we mean in this case about intervals. But Dylan, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I'm going to say both. Okay, so here's the way that I'm taking the question. Scale degree is just the notes of the scale. So let's say we're in the key of C, C, D, E, F, G, A, B. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then intervals can occur within that. So if we're taking the key of C, for example, if I play a D to an A, well, that is a fifth interval. Now, the scale degrees I'm playing is the second and the sixth. So when I'm listening to a song, I hear both, because when different chords are playing, the intervals are going to react with those chords. For instance, if I'm playing a C chord and then I hit a C note, that's the one of the chord and of the key. But if I hit an F, that C is now a 5. So the intervals change with every chord. So when I'm listening to a song, sometimes I'll hear the scale degrees, sometimes I'll hear the intervals, but when I'm listening to songs, I hear a mix of both.
Yes, I do too. I was going to say that there are the scale degrees. So in your example, Dylan, C would be the root of the C scale and the key of C,
Right.
but it's the fifth of the fifth of the F chord. It is the chord tone. C is the fifth
Yes.
chord tone against the F chord.
We haven't changed keys at all.
Right.
Just
Right.
the pitch function has changed.
Right. Exactly. And a way to kind of think about this is we have Dylan with us here talking today. Now, Dylan, his name, Dylan's name is like the letter C. It's the name of the note. But the word Dylan doesn't tell us really anything. It tells you that he's not Tom Hess, or he's not Mike Simpson, or he's not somebody else, but there are multiple Dylans and Dylan Andrews in the world. Okay. So when Dylan is at home and he's got little kids running around that are his, okay, he's now a father. Okay. But if he's got little kids running around and they're not his, then maybe he's an uncle.
Mm-hmm.
Or if his parents had little kids recently, then he's a much, much, much older brother. The idea is that it's the same Dylan, still the C note, same person with the same name, but the function, the role has changed. So right now, Dylan's here as Dylan, the guitar teacher, the master guitar teacher. But when he's at home with his wife, he's, Dylan, the husband, very different role, right?
Yes.
When he's with his kids, it's a very different role, right? And so same Dylan, same letter, but as Dylan finds himself in different contexts, there's different relationships. Who Dylan is or what he means to those other people or other groups of people changes drastically. That's exactly the same with notes on the guitar. So the C note is still C. It's in the same spot. It's the same sound, not the same feeling, same sound, no matter where you play it. No matter what other chord you play it against, it's still the same sound. The note itself is the same sound, but the relationships change, and that's what changes the feeling. So I'm listening for both. I'm listening when the C note is played, just like Dylan said, I'm also thinking about, okay, this is the root of the key if we're in the key of C. But if we're in A minor chord gets played, well, now it's the third of the sixth chord. So the sixth chord has its own emotion within the key. And the third against a minor chord has its own relationship and emotion. And the third against a minor chord, which happens to be 6 in a major key, furthers that emotion even further. Okay. So all of those things are kind of thought about as one. It's at the same time.
Yeah.
If you focus on just one or the other, you're not wrong. It's just, it's incomplete. You have incomplete information.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just going to say, this is also another great example of why music theory is so important when it comes to ear training. All of these things we're talking about, if you don't know music theory, you can't even have an in-depth conversation about it. Like an example of that question is when, let's say we're in the key of C, if a B note is played over that C chord, that's one of the easier ones to identify because that's the 7. It's a very tense sound. It desperately wants to go up to the 1. But if that B note is played over the F, well, now it's a sharp 4, one of my favorite things to target over 4 chords. And because I know that theory, I know exactly that when the 4 chord is going to be played, I can go after that Lydian type of floating sound that I absolutely love. So when I'm improvising, I absolutely know what chords are happening so I can take advantage of these pitches functions changing.
Totally. And we like the same thing over the 4 chord, the sharp 4, the Lydian sound.
Oh yeah, it's like my favorite.
Beautiful.
Favorite thing to hit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard not to want to play the B over the F.
Yeah.
Okay. And milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah.
Totally, totally. Okay, next question here. There was one about perfect pitch. Here it is. How can I train myself to have perfect pitch?
Hmm.
Want to take this one, Dylan?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to clarify, make sure we're all on the same page. There's relative pitch and there's perfect pitch. Relative pitch is exactly what we're talking about, being able to identify intervals, how they react with other chords. Perfect pitch is being able to just know exactly what note is being played, what chord is being played immediately. When a C chord is being played, you know, oh, that's a C chord. A C69, oh, this is a C69. You don't even have to just know. And this is usually developed before birth, or oftentimes too, I believe, before puberty. And I think only like 7% or some low percentage
Yeah,
have
it's lower than that even. Yeah.
it. Yeah. So a low percentage has perfect pitch. Now, in my opinion, I would not worry about training perfect pitch because the amount of time it takes is incredible. The amount of effort. I would focus all attention on training relative pitch. And two, relative pitch has a lot of advantages because when you're listening out for just the intervals in the music theory, that also tells you exactly how they function, how they feel, how they react. So personally, I wouldn't worry about developing perfect pitch.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, not only would I not worry about it, I don't even want it. I don't
No.
have it, don't want it. And here's why. Perfect pitch allows one to identify notes with zero reference point and
Yeah.
no relationships. So if a car horn outside goes off, someone with perfect pitch would instantaneously be able to identify, oh, that's F sharp or that's B flat. I don't care.
So
Well,
what?
I don't care what the car horn tone is. I mean, is it useful? It might seem obvious to think, well, yeah, it would be useful to know what all the notes sound like without any reference point because you wouldn't need the reference point in order to identify. And that sounds good. But music is not about notes. Music is about relationships. If I go to the guitar, play any note on the guitar, and only one note, you have now no context. There's no relate. Let's assume you hadn't listened to any music in the last 5 minutes, and I go and play something. The note would be worthless, meaningless. It means nothing. There's no emotion. There's no relationship. There's no function. There's nothing. It might as well be dead. We might as well listen to silence. It has no emotion. Emotion comes through relationships between the notes. It's those relationships that's causing the emotion. That's what we want to identify because that's what we want to understand about music that we like. Why does this feel the way it does when I hear it? Why do I react this way when I'm hearing whatever I'm hearing? That's where the gold is. Identifying what's causing the emotion within the music that I experience. Or if you're writing a song or improvising, you don't want to know where B flat is. Who cares where B flat is? I mean, why would you care, really? Well, who cares? The only thing, at least in my opinion, and if you have a different opinion, that's okay. But in my opinion, the only thing I want to know is where is this specific feeling that I want to express in this moment? Where is it? I don't care what note it is, but I want to know where it is, and I want to know where it is before I play it. And I'm going to be all over that note or that chord or that series of notes. So relative pitch, as Dylan was describing, relative relates to the relationship, and the relationship is what creates the emotion. Harmonically and melodically, at least. We're not talking about rhythm and other musical elements. So the relative pitch helps you to identify through the relationship, using other words, through the emotion, what the notes are or what the chords are. That's where the gold is. That's where the gold is. For
Yeah.
years and years and years and years, there were people selling courses on perfect pitch, and whether they work or not, I don't know. Haven't taken the course, but I though even when I was younger, didn't know so much about music. I thought, Why would you want that? I mean, so what that you know where the A note is? I mean,
Yeah.
and what are you going to do with that? Yeah, that was always been my thought about that. All right, so let's see here. Let's take Angel. Hello, Angel. Let's take Angel's question. How to figure out the chord progression just by hearing a song without the guitar.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways, and there's a ton of ways to train your ear to hear chord progressions. But there is a trick that you can do that all you need to be able to do is you need to know how scales work, and you need to be able to sing scales, ascending and descending. So if you can't do this yet, I would start practicing there immediately. That's a foundational thing. But if you are listening to a song and there is a chord that you do not know, we'll do the key of C again. So there's the scale. Do that one more time. So if you hear a note, let's say this. You hear that note, you hear that chord being played, and you don't know what it is. What you can do is first sing it. And then you just start descending the scale until you get back to the one. And you count as you do it, and then it tells you, oh, that was the 4. And again, if you hear this, that is the 2. So this is just one little trick that I've found that is extremely useful. When you don't know what a particular chord or note is being played, just go ahead and sing that note or the root of the chord being played and just start descending the scale. You could as well ascend, but if you descend, I find it to be easier. At least it's been easier for me, and that'll tell you what the answer is. And of course, this takes practice to get it done, but that's an awesome way that I've used many times to figure out things.
Yeah, that's a really good technique. Really good technique. Here's another approach you can also use in combination or in addition to what Dylan just shared. And that is, instead of thinking, I've got to go out and learn what all the chords in a key sound like and feel like so I can go identify them all, it's better, in my opinion, just to learn one. Anyone. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
Okay. Because in order for the skill that you want to develop, Angel, in order for the skill to be useful, in order for it to be reliable meaning if you're jamming with Dylan and Dylan plays a particular chord, do you want to have a 30% chance of identifying all the chords that he plays correctly? Or would you rather have a 100% chance or a 95% chance of identifying any one of the chords he plays correctly and not know what the others are? I would take that any day of the week than being 70% wrong on everything, or 50% wrong, or even 30% wrong. I would want something that is dependable, that I can rely on. So if we're playing in harmonic minor and that 5 chord comes and it sounds like a ton of bricks, you know immediately exactly what that chord is, because only that chord feels that way. It has this power that no other chord in the key has. So that allows it to be more reliable, that when that 5 chord comes, you know exactly what it is. You know exactly the emotion it's going to create. And probably more importantly, as a lead guitar player, that gives you all kinds of clues, useful clues of what could I do over that chord. Well, I'm probably going to play way more aggressively over the 5 chord than I would over the 1 or the 4 or the 6 or whatever. I would probably play faster. The vibrato probably would be thicker, heavier. The articulation would be stronger. I want to make that chord, when strong enough, is going to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand straight up. That's the feeling, the power of that chord. And if that chord is preceded by 3, which is the major, relative major of the key, that sets up the power of the 5 even more. So those kinds of combinations it's better to, in my opinion, it's better to identify that way. Just memorize one chord. It could be the 1, the 4, the 6. It doesn't really matter. But you want to latch onto that one so it's reliable. So every single time that chord is played in harmonic minor or in the major keys or whatever it is, you know exactly where it is. You know exactly what to go, and you know where to go, and you know exactly what to do with it. There's no question. There may be questions on what is the next chord or the one before, but on that chord, whatever it is, you're all over it like white on rice. You got it. And then from there, then you add a second chord and you just laser target in on that one. So if 5 was the first one, maybe you're going to target the 6 or something else and just memorize, how does that feel? Find lots of songs that, let's say you were trying to memorize the feeling of 1 to 6 in a minor key, 1 to 6, 1 to 6. Find lots of songs that have 1 to 6 in it. Listen to all of them and ask yourself, what is the common feeling here? The songs are different tempos, maybe different keys, different styles, but there's a commonness to the 1 to 6, 1 to, what is that emotionally? That will help you to latch on so that when you hear it again, you're like, that's 1 to 6. And it's easy to identify.
Yeah.
All right. That's a great question, Angel. Let's see here. Let's take this one. Is there a preferred way to learn how to sing second voices or harmonies? I think what Oded might be asking is, if there's a melody that's already existing, how to hear or sing the harmony without like trying to figure it out intervallically on the guitar.
Yeah, well, one way to practice being able to identify melodies or figure things out, or I'm sorry, identify harmonies or figure out harmonies, is to try to sing them. So, one good exercise to do is to just play like a 3-note melody and then try to sing a third above that. And then what you can do is, if you're struggling with it, like if I was just going to go, I was going to play 1, 2, 3. Well, you could do this and go 1, 2, 3. So I sang up the scale, and now my voice is harmonizing with the melody. So I hope that answers your question, but that is a way that you can train your ear to be able to hear harmonies, is by singing them and being able to do it really reliably.
Awesome. Very good stuff. So Dylan, I believe you have something for our guests here, our friends, to check out and maybe download.
Yes, so I've put together a video for the 5 easy ways to practice ear training. When I was first learning ear training, I mean, it had been years into my playing. I started when I was a little kid. I didn't even know that you could train your ear. And when I started doing it, I found ear training to be extremely hard, difficult, frustrating, and absolutely boring. So what I put together is, through a lot of years of training and practicing, I found a lot of great ways to practice ear training that is easy and also fun to do and makes you look forward to practicing your ear. So I've put together a video of my top 5 ways that's easy and fun to practice ear training, that is totally free, that you guys can download.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. I also have something for you guys to download. It is not on, it's not specific to ear training, but it does relate indirectly. And that is my Fretboard Freedom Blueprint to help you discover nearly effortless ways to visualize scales on the guitar. So most of you already know I asked you, hey, do you know your scales? You probably say, yep, I know them. Great. I'm glad that you think you know your scales. But if you were, let's say, on string 3 of a particular scale, let's say the Lydian mode or whatever, and you were going to jump up 3 or 4 positions higher on that same string without having to reference in your mind back to the 6th string or to the 1st string as a reference point, could you do that? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But if that would take, if you couldn't do that instantly, like immediately, this free e-guide that you can download for free right now, there's no strings attached, will help you to do that. So you can visualize it without having to always have a reference point back to the sixth string or the fifth string or wherever you kind of currently visualize your scale positions from. So it's totally free. You guys can download it right now. All right. So very good. So Dylan, thank you for hanging out here today and sharing all these really cool insights. A lot of the stuff you shared, I hadn't actually thought of before, different approaches or different points of view. And that's really cool. I want to thank everybody who is hanging out with here live and asking great questions. All of you, it's really cool to have you guys here and asking good questions. Thank you all. Thank you, Dylan. It's awesome. And we will see you guys next time. Take care, everybody. Have an awesome week.